Have you ever had something during your childhood that seems really interesting or cool to you, only to realize as you grow older that actually that thing really wasn't very good? Well, that's how I feel about this laptop today. This is an HP Pavilion x360 m3-u101dx. This mouthful of a computer is a Toyota Prius laptop/tablet convertible thing. It's one of those devices that has a 360-degree hinge, allowing for basically any position you want. And it cost $449 back in May of 2017. And I know that because I was there. This wasn't mine, it was for a younger sibling of mine, but I was still exposed to it. And while it seemed like an interesting machine at first, as you would expect for a consumer-grade HP device, it didn't take very long for it to start having problems. The biggest casualty being the battery for it, which is no longer in this computer, because it's a fire hazard. But anyways, for $449, this computer got you an Intel Core i3-7100U dual-core mobile processor, 6GB of dual-channel DDR4 memory, a disgusting, awful 500GB, 5400 RPM mechanical hard drive, Intel HD Graphics 620, a 14-inch 768p IPS touchscreen, and it also has an Intel wireless card, and of course Windows 10 Home. I wouldn't have any complaints about the hardware configuration on the surface, except HP has decided to cut costs by putting a mechanical hard drive in this computer rather than a solid-state drive. Sure, it was technically a different time, but even by 2017, SSDs were rapidly dropping in price. It wasn't very long after this computer was bought new that we were able to get an SSD that was the same capacity as this hard drive for very cheap. It also just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me in a computer like this that invites you to move it around and use it in a bunch of different ways, yet it has a spinning hard drive. The entire reason you would have bought this laptop anyway is because of that hinge. That's about the only thing that is special about this machine. Otherwise, it is just a boring, generic HP laptop. But now, it's a generic, boring HP laptop that can be used in many different ways. The reason we bought this specifically is because this computer was bought for a young child, and having a device like this where it's basically impossible for the hinge to be pushed back too far even if it's handled roughly seemed like a smart idea for a young child. And also, it was cheap. As I said, you're really not getting anything super impressive. It looks a bit more premium, but don't kid yourself, this entire laptop is basically made out of plastic. A running theme you might notice with this is there really isn't a whole lot to this laptop either. Exterior-wise, there's nothing of note on the lid, nothing on the front. The right side of the laptop has the power jack, and unfortunately, it's that terrible, tiny barrel connector that HP has been using for a long time, meaning it's very easy to damage either the port or the power cord. There is an HDMI port, 2 USB ports, and a full-size SD card slot. The left side of the laptop has the power button and LED, a Kensington lock slot, another USB port, a headphone-microphone combo jack, a volume rocker, and the hard drive LED. And the back has a whole lot of nothing. Note that the USB ports on the right side of the laptop are USB 3.0 ports. However, the single port on the left side is only a USB 2.0 port. Additionally, the HDMI port appears to be only HDMI 1.2 since this computer can't even output anything higher than 1080p. But they do redeem themselves a little in my book because the SD card slot is a real proper SD card slot with a mechanism that clicks into place when you insert a card rather than just shoving the card into the slot and hoping it works. As typical for HP laptops, the hinges on this computer are pretty tight, meaning it's not possible to open this computer easily with one hand. And another fun quirk with my particular machine is that while it can't completely fall over because this has no battery in it, essentially most of the weight in the bottom half of the machine is missing, meaning the computer will not sit evenly on a flat surface. The palm rest again is entirely plastic, but it's at least got this fun design on it, and it has the speakers, the keyboard, and the touchpad, and of course the Intel Core i3 sticker, and that's about it. Finally, we have the webcam, and of course that display, which is glossy, but it's a touchscreen, so that just makes sense. This is arguably why you would buy this computer, and we'll get to this in a little while. The bottom of the machine has the cooling vents, That's right, this is another HP computer that has the cooling vents pointed downwards, which means it doesn't take much at all to completely block the vents on this computer. Great work, HP. And I should excuse myself when I say vents, it's actually just one vent. Despite it appearing so, this computer only has one fan output, that being this one. The other vent is purely decorative. Now I get this because I think the computer looks better this way. I mean, it would be strange if there was just a random vent. But anyway, of course, there's also some intake on the bottom, but for the most part, there really isn't a whole lot to cooling on this machine. For everything else, it's time to break out the tools. This computer requires a full disassembly to get to basically any components. Fortunately, while it seems a bit intimidating, this is actually not the worst computer to take apart. There's a total of 10 screws on the bottom, 4 of which are obvious, another is in the center, in my case it's missing, and 5 of them are hidden under the top rubber foot, which I don't like. And as you can see, the rubber on this computer is actually broken because it's extremely difficult to take these feet off. Then it's a matter of unclipping the palm rest, which is held in entirely with plastic clips. It can be tough at first, but after you've done it enough times, it's actually pretty easy to take off. You do have to unplug the cables for the keyboard and trackpad. They are ribbon cables, and they can break. They're kind of a pain to take off. The trackpad appears to be entirely screwed in, but the keyboard is not. It's riveted into place. So if the keyboard needs to be replaced, well, you probably need to buy an entire new palm rest. Otherwise, you can see the spot where the battery would have been. There's the mechanical hard drive right next to it, which is plugged into the motherboard with a ribbon cable, meaning you technically need a proprietary adapter in order to plug the drive into the computer. And to get at the memory and even the wireless card, the motherboard needs to come out. Thankfully, this is also not really a super difficult task. There's a total of 5 connectors going into the board, plus the wireless card, technically. And what's left behind is the power jack, which is completely replaceable. And all of the I/O and the power button on the left side is a separate daughter board. So if any of those ports break, it's fairly easy to replace them. But if any ports on the right side break beyond the power jack, it's time to get out a soldering iron. There's also a couple magnets in the base of the device, as you would expect, but because this thing has a hard drive, it means there aren't any on the right side. Not that this really matters, but just thought I'd point it out anyway. The RAM and wireless card are socketed, in addition to the hard drive, and this computer has no DVD drive, so that's one less thing I need to worry about. The wireless card location is kind of in a weird spot. So is the CMOS battery connector, so you technically have to take the board out, even though they are kind of accessible. And the memory is hidden under this shield, which I get why it's there, but I hate these. They suck to take off. Finally, a couple other things. You can see what the vent looks like when the computer is open, with even more proof that that second vent is purely decorational and doesn't actually, like, vent any air. And here's a look at those hinges. It does appear that there is some metal reinforcing, so technically the screws are screwed into metal, which is probably why the computer sits at a funny angle, because there's metal in the case. But don't kid yourself, the entire base of this computer is still plastic. If they wanted to break, they probably could. But it seems that, so far, knock on wood, the hinges on this computer appear to be just fine. Like I said, this is honestly far from the worst laptop I've ever worked on. I filmed this entire portion in probably about 10 or 15 minutes. It is possible to replace things, which is good, because there's a solid chance you're going to need to do it, because many parts on this computer have stopped working. Mainly the cooling fan and that power jack have acted up on this computer, preventing proper operation. So this computer has already needed to be serviced several times. It definitely seems like the quality of the parts aren't that great. And the basic theme continues with the BIOS. This machine has the typical options you would expect for HP at this point, including system information and system diagnostics, which, credit where it's due, is a pretty nice feature to have, though pretty common in modern laptops from any manufacturer these days. And the BIOS has literally nothing. The only interesting feature about it is that they hastily programmed touch controls into it, so you can use it even if the computer is in tablet mode. Otherwise, there are absolutely no notable settings on this other than security settings, the setting to keep the fan on all the time, a setting to toggle the functionality of the function row keys, and a setting that enables or disables the battery remaining time, which I'm not even sure why that's a setting. And of course, as you would expect for an HP computer, it's got system recovery built in as well. As you would expect for any modern version of Windows, it just boots into the recovery environment, and it has a HP Recovery Manager option that allows you to do a full system recovery, which is nice, except because of that mechanical hard drive, a recovery on this machine takes hours. When I set this computer up, I'm not even kidding, it took 6 hours. I basically had to leave the computer and go do something else for the entire day. That's how slow this is, which is not a good sign for the usability of this machine. This would have had Windows 10 when it was new, but because Doomsday, it's now running Windows 11, despite not being an officially supported computer. Because Microsoft, I made it run it anyway. This computer would have been one Windows 10 version out of date since it was purchased in May of 2017. It shipped with 1607, which means that from the moment this computer was taken out of the box, it had to be updated. And of course, it's full of HP crap. I've done what I can to try and clean up the install. I disabled startup items, but that doesn't prevent this machine from having so much stuff running in the background from HP. And nothing here is useful. There's HP audio switch, which hilariously brings up a data collection prompt. There's this HP ePrint thing. The HP documentation, which just opens a PDF in a web browser. The Recovery Manager, which has all kind of options you would expect. HP Support Assistant, which doesn't even properly run on Windows 11 apparently. At least this version. Maybe the only useful thing about this program is that you can update drivers within it that you wouldn't otherwise get by using Windows Update, but otherwise it's yet another thing to sit here and harvest data. There's the HP Jumpstart, which I thought would be something interesting, but it turns out it's just a registration form, and by clicking skip, it just closes. There's HP Orbit, which is a thing that lets you pair your phone to your computer, which is completely redundant since you can just do this in Windows now. There's the Bang & Olufsen control panel, Intel Rapid Storage technology, which is so out of date it doesn't even load. And as for third-party things, there's an Amazon web app preloaded out of the box, a copy of Cyberlink Power Media Player and Power Director, which feels extremely unnecessary on this computer, especially Power Director, where this computer's screen resolution is so low that trying to edit anything on it feels like it would be terrible. There's a Dropbox ad, a shortcut to Priceline.com, and Simple Mahjong and Wild Tangent Games. And there's also McAfee, but I uninstalled that for obvious reasons. It should go without saying that not a single piece of software on this computer is genuinely useful, and honestly, it would have been better if I just clean installed this machine. Especially because of this thing. This is the Toshiba MQ-01ABF050, a 500GB 5400 RPM hard drive. Like I said, not only has HP used a mechanical hard drive in this machine, but impressively, in my case, it seems that HP has used one of the worst hard drives I have ever seen. This hard drive is so bad, it actually is mind-boggling just how awful this thing is. Doing anything on this computer is painful. Trying to update it is a several hour long process, and most of the time, this computer just has to be left on overnight because it takes that long to update. Which makes it even more sour that this thing was so out of date when it was new, because it took hours for it to be properly set up. Loading any program is easily a 10 to 15 second operation, if not more, most of the time. And it's entirely because that hard drive is maxed out. I like to think I'm a pretty patient person since I grew up using a very slow computer, but this thing really was testing my patience. This machine was basically unusable from the moment you took it out of the box, and I remember that being my first thought when I actually tried using this thing. The combination of a mechanical hard drive plus Windows 10, now Windows 11, and HP bloatware has just all blended together into an absolutely awful, unusable mess from the moment this computer was pulled out of the box. The fact that HP has put this piece of junk in this computer that wasn't even the cheapest possible thing is honestly kind of just insulting. It really just was the end of the road for putting mechanical hard drives in laptops like this, even cheap ones. This computer would have been much better served by a 64 or 128GB SSD. Even if the capacity would have been lower, it would have been way more usable. So at this point, you're probably screaming at me, why haven't you done that? These days, a decent quality 120GB SSD can be purchased for like $10. Why haven't I put one in this computer? The simple truth is I just honestly don't care about this thing enough to spend any money on it. Because while the computer works, there's nothing special about it. CPU performance is fine, but it's an old mobile dual core. All of these chips have aged terribly, and a Coffee Lake computer from not much longer after this would have been manufactured would probably run rings around this computer. If this was the only computer I had, I could make it work. But in a crowd, it doesn't stick out. There's nothing special to this computer. Unsurprisingly, I guess, Cinebench 2024 doesn't even work on this computer. I had to run Cinebench R23 on it, where it took an insanely long time to do any tests. Cooling on this thing isn't particularly impressive, but it's also not a problem. This chip is only 25 watts at most, and it seems like under a stress test, it hovers around 70 degrees Celsius. Which is probably a miracle because the cooler on this thing is impressively tiny. There's nothing to it. It's extremely light, and it's only a single heat pipe. There's basically no cooling mass in it. And since it has Intel HD Graphics 620, it's probably no surprise that gaming is not this computer's strong suit. But that doesn't mean I didn't try anyway. To give this thing its best shot, I installed the latest graphics driver for this, which appears to be from earlier this year. The latest driver from HP is from 2018, and since I figured this wasn't going to run games even from when this computer would have been new anyway, and I've done enough complaining in this video instead, I decided to try some older stuff on this machine to show it can do some stuff. Golf with Your Friends is a game that my good friend Jordan Woolery uses to benchmark his crap, so that seemed like a decent thing to try on here. And it will hit 60, but unsurprisingly, the frame rate is incredibly inconsistent depending on what is going on the display. But it's more than playable. And it seems like those graphics are what's being maxed out here, though we are also using basically the entire power that the CPU can provide. Since I didn't want to wait for GTA 5 to install, and honestly I didn't think it was going to install anyway, I installed the next best thing, which was GTA 4. The built-in benchmark tool crashed when I tried to run it, but upon setting it to low settings, it works. Not very well, it's set like 20 FPS. Loading a new game yields about the same results. Most of the time, it's low 20 FPS. Occasionally, it will get as high as 30 FPS, and worst case, it will drop to 15 FPS. I mean, it works, but the frame rate dips low enough that it honestly bothers me a lot. Portal 2 is probably the game that ran the best on this, which is hardly surprising here, I suppose, as it achieved frame rates well above 60, and apparently I forgot to enable VSync, so the frame rate's even more out of control. But this is a game that can be played on the Pavilion with little to no problem at all, aside from horridly slow drive access times. Here's kind of a random one. This is Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed from 2012. This is a game I was thinking about lately, so I decided to go ahead and try it on here. It's a DX9 game that can run on Windows XP, and it was also designed for consoles that came out in 2005, and also the Wii U. But by setting this thing to low quality in this hilarious config window, it will run just fine and seems pretty playable, but once again, the frame rate is all over the place. However, if there is any struggle with this game on this machine, it's loading times from that dreadful hard drive once again. Granted, loading any game off of this is gonna be slow, but this game might have actually been one of the slowest games. I have had this game on console load faster over a disc than this game will load on this hard drive. That is impressive. Finally, it wouldn't be one of my videos without trying Flatout, so here's Flatout Ultimate Carnage from 2008. This is just an enhanced remake of Flatout 2, and it seems to run pretty well on this machine. So, it can game, but those integrated graphics are going to be struggling. In fact, basically everything on this computer is going to be struggling. The CPU is obviously being pushed pretty much to its limits. Additionally, 6 gigabytes of RAM, well, this probably would have had 4 gigabytes of RAM otherwise, so it's an improvement there. Certain games were running out of memory, and of course, that hard drive. It goes back to what I said before. If you absolutely had nothing else, this was the only computer you had, you could probably make it work. But otherwise, there's basically no reason to use this computer for this. The hardware isn't there at all, and you can't even really upgrade it. It seems the best you can put in this computer is a motherboard with a dual-core i5 instead of a dual-core i3. This computer just wasn't meant for gaming, or high-performance things, or, well, a lot of things, actually. If you're curious, this is also what pushed that little heatsink the hardest as we breached 80 degrees. Let's just get the rest of this out of the way. The peripherals on this thing suck. Literally all of them are bad. The keyboard's fine, but it's nothing special. There surprisingly isn't a whole lot of chassis flex, except for the area where the battery is missing on this machine. So likely the palm rest is just being pressed down in that spot where the battery is missing. The keyboard's okay, I mean it works, but my particular unit had all these weird problems, like for example the spacebar just isn't working right, so you have to press really hard, which means I was making a ton of mistakes on this keyboard. So while chassis flex isn't a problem for the keyboard, it is a problem for that touchpad because there's no reinforcement for it. It's directly over the battery. So using the touchpad at all is like sticking your hand into mashed potatoes. It's so squishy. And even worse, it rattles like crazy. While the actual click noise provided by the touchpad is fine, the rattling that's generated by the touchpad when you're clicking on it hurts my ears. The speakers are okay, but they're horribly blown on this unit. They have a teeny tiny bit of bass, the clarity isn't anything special, and the audio drivers don't appear to provide any special sauce for these speakers at all. But I've saved the worst for last, that display. The thing you'd arguably be buying this computer for, it's garbage. It's terrible. It is an IPS panel, so viewing angles are pretty good. Brightness is also fine, but this display is a pretty unique problem that I can't say I have ever seen before on any other computer. So bear with me, because it's pretty difficult to try and explain this. But take a look at the screen right now. You might notice that there is this banding on the background of the settings app. The shadows aren't smooth at all. It seems like it doesn't know how to properly render them. The best way I can describe it is that dark images on this panel look like a Windows XP computer that's been set in 16-bit color mode. It just looks awful. This is the kind of thing that if you have dark mode enabled on Windows 11, you're gonna notice it. And I also noticed this in primarily GTA 4 when it's dark. You can see this banding in the sky. I thought the graphics drivers were the problem for this at first, but plugging it into my external monitor makes the problem go away. So it seems it's an actual problem with the display itself. For most people, it's probably not an issue, but for me, it just annoys me. This display is also just horrible with color in general. Comparing the internal display to my monitor that I use to monitor the output from my capture card, it's just brutal. And even compared to my cheapo LCD panel on my bench, it still loses. Doing any kind of color accurate work on this display just isn't happening. And in fact, even during the gaming portions, halfway through, I gave up on it altogether and switched to an external monitor. This display just hurts my brain. Finally, since there's no battery to test because the battery is swelled so bad, therefore it gets an automatic failing grade, the wireless card on this computer is fine. It's an Intel wireless card, which in my experience seems to be the best kind to have, except for when they're not. It's wireless AC, Bluetooth seems to work fine. It's basically about all you could ask for. I'm sorry if I'm being too negative, but there's just nothing here that's really special. The entire point of it is that hinge, which isn't a unique thing to this computer at all, not even when it was new. I'll reiterate it once again. If this is the only computer I had, well, I would be okay with it, but it wouldn't take much for me to want to consider another option. The hardware at best is average, and at worst, it's fucking dreadful. The peripherals, again, are average at best and terrible at its worst. That single cooling fan on this can get pretty whiny at times. Battery life was also terrible when it was new. And the components in this computer really just don't seem to be very reliable. I've had so many things act up on this computer over the years. While yes, it's good a lot of those things can be replaced, they shouldn't have to be. There just are better options out there, especially at the price these appear to be going for, which is more than $100 for a working one. Most of the ones on eBay appear to be broken. At that price, you'd be far better off with something else.